You spend years chasing light. Books, meditations, gurus, mantras, all whisper the same promise. Awakening will set you free. And then, one quiet morning it happened. Not with thunder or revelation, but with an almost unbearable silence. The noise inside you stops, and you expect peace. But what comes next is not peace. It's emptiness. A silence so vast it echoes. The world that once shimmered with meaning suddenly looks fragile, like scenery built for a play that has ended. You thought enlightenment would feel like victory. It feels like grief, because what's dying is everything you called you. The plans, the stories, the endless explanations, they dissolve. And what's left is not someone improved, but someone barely there. Just awareness, naked and trembling under its own light. This is the part nobody warns you about. That awakening doesn't hand you a new life. It quietly steals the false one you were living. It doesn't add peace. It removes distraction. It doesn't fill you with joy. It empties you of illusion. And standing in that emptiness, you realize how much of your joy was borrowed from lies. The old comforts start to taste artificial. The dramas you once believed in, they fall flat. You try to return to them, but they no longer hold weight. The laughter of the crowd now sounds rehearsed. The ambitions you chase now feel like echoes of someone else's dream. You see how much of life was built on pretending not to see. And yet, in this quiet collapse, something subtle stirs. A stillness that was always there beneath the noise. It doesn't announce itself. It simply waits for you to stop reaching. You begin to sense that the grief itself is sacred. That what's being mourned is the death of illusion. Real awakening doesn't happen when you gain wisdom. It begins when meaning dies, when all that was false is burned away and you stand inside the ashes, breathing for the first time without a mask. The peace you wanted isn't somewhere ahead. It's hidden in this loss, disguised as nothingness, waiting for you to stop running. So you sit inside the silence, afraid and alive. And you understand at last, the light you were chasing was never outside of you. It was what remained after everything false had gone dark. When the fog lifts, you begin to see what was hidden. At first, it feels like a gift. The air becomes sharp, the outlines clear. But soon you notice things you were never meant to see. The small betrayals that pass as kindness. The smile stretched too wide. The way people trade authenticity for belonging. Truth for comfort, silence for survival. You start to notice how every conversation is a negotiation of masks. How people perform happiness like actors reading from invisible scripts. How the world depends on a silent agreement. Don't look too closely. Don't question the play. And you, the one who woke up mid-performance, sit among them, seeing every string being pulled. You see how praise is often fear in disguise. How outrage is sometimes loneliness wearing armor. You see how entire careers are built not on purpose, but on pretending. And suddenly, everything that once felt normal now feels hollow. There's a kind of nausea that comes with seeing too much, because clarity doesn't arrive with comfort. It arrives with loss. You lose the ability to unsee what you now know. You lose the simple joy of believing in appearances. You lose your membership in the tribe of the Unawake, and people sense it. They look at you differently, not because you've changed what you say, but because your eyes no longer play the game. They feel exposed near you, as if your silence reveals more than your words ever could. They start to pull away, unconsciously defending the illusion you no longer feed. And this is the hidden cost of awakening. You begin to pay for your honesty with your belonging. The truth is, the world needs illusion to function. Without its masks, everything would collapse. The markets, the conversations, even the smiles at family dinners. It's not that people don't want truth. They just don't want the responsibility that comes with seeing it. So the awakened walk carefully, half in, half out. They learn to hold their tongue, to nod politely while their soul whispers beneath the noise. It's not superiority, it's survival, because clarity is heavy when you carry it alone. And sometimes you wish you could go back to believing the promises, back to the fog where ignorance looked like peace. But once the eye opens, it doesn't close again. You can blink, you can turn away, but the vision remains. Once you see the cracks in the mask, you can't laugh at the play anymore. A bird that has lived its whole life in a cage never fears the bars. It fears the sky. When the door finally opens, the air feels too wide, too silent, too unknown. And so it hesitates, not because it wants to stay, but because it has forgotten how to fly without permission. That's what awakening feels like. You step out of the cage of illusion and discover that freedom isn't warm. It's vast and quiet, and sometimes painfully empty. The noise that used to fill your days fades, and you realize how much of your life was made of echoes. People drift away, not with anger, but with distance. The conversations that once comforted you now ring hollow. You scroll through the same faces, the same laughter, and see how much of it is performance, how every smile hides a subtle fear of silence. And suddenly, that silence is all you have. You begin to mistake it for failure. You think, I must be broken. Everyone else seems connected. But this loneliness isn't punishment, it's purification. You are being stripped of borrowed voices, washed clean of every false identity that once told you who you were. There's a stage in every awakening when the soul outgrows its surroundings. Like roots pressing against a small pot, you can't breathe in what's too shallow anymore. The space between you and the world widens, and that space, that unbearable gap, is where truth begins to breathe. Silence isn't emptiness, it's where truth breathes. At first, that truth feels cold. It asks you to sit alone, to listen without noise, to stop translating your depth into something others can easily digest. And when you finally surrender, the loneliness begins to change shape. In that stillness, you hear something softer than thought, the quiet pulse of existence itself. It doesn't judge, it doesn't explain, it just is. And you realize that what you called loneliness was simply the absence of distraction. You were never unloved, only surrounded by noise too loud to feel love silent. If this silence feels familiar, tell me below. Your words might remind someone else that they aren't alone in this awakening. Freedom feels like exile until you learn its language. And when you finally do, you see that solitude was never separation. It was a space where the soul learned to breathe again. You try to return home, but everyone's still asleep. You walk through the same streets, see the same faces, and yet something invisible has changed. Not the world, but your eyes. The noise that once felt alive now hums like an old machine. People move in rhythm, talk in loops, each word rehearsed, each smile pre-programmed by a culture that forgot it was dreaming. You want to speak, to tell them what you've seen, but words feel too small, too heavy with misunderstanding. So you stop, you nod, you listen, you smile gently, and you realize you no longer need to convince anyone of anything. The world will wake when it's ready, and no amount of shouting can hurry a dream. This is the strange tenderness of returning. You carry the memory of light into rooms still lit by imitation. You sit among people arguing over shadows, and instead of anger you feel compassion, because you were once part of the same play. Believing the roles were real and the masks were faces. There's a loneliness in that compassion, not the sharp loneliness of isolation, but the soft ache of understanding too much. You want to reach out, but you know that touching a dream doesn't wake it. It only disturbs the sleeper. So you love them quietly, from a distance wide enough for peace. You begin to understand that awakening was never meant to make you fit back in. It wasn't a return ticket to normalcy. It was a gentle exile into truth. The awakened don't belong to the world they left, and they don't seek belonging in the one they're creating. They live in between, witnesses to both, servants to neither. You watch life unfold, wars, laughter, celebrations, heartbreak, and it all feels strangely sacred. Even the chaos, even the noise, because now you can see it for what it is, a collective dream, beautiful in its confusion. There's peace in letting people dream. You no longer feel the urge to wake them. You just hold the mirror steady so that when they finally open their eyes, they might glimpse something real reflected back at them. And in that gentle stillness, you discover a deeper kind of belonging, not to a place, not a people, but to awareness itself. You belong to the silence between words, the space between thoughts, the eternal watcher behind the mask. You were never meant to fit back in, only to hold the mirror steady. In the dark soil, a seed breaks open. From the outside, it looks like destruction, a life splitting apart before it's even begun. But from within, something sacred is happening. The breaking is the becoming, and so it is with awakening. Everything you thought was an ending was really a preparation for depth. For a long time, you thought life was punishing you, The losses, the solitude, the silence, all felt like cruel detours on the road to peace. But now, as you stand at the edge of your becoming, you see it differently. Every delay was timing you for truth. Every ache was hollowing you out so the light could finally fit. You begin to understand that nothing was wasted. Not the heartbreak, not the confusion, not even the years of pretending. They were all part of the dissolving, the slow unmasking of everything false. You thought awakening was supposed to happen to you. A lightning strike, a single revelation. But it was happening through you, quietly, patiently. In every moment you thought nothing was happening at all. This is the paradox the awake realized too late. That awakening doesn't pull you away from life. It roots you deeper into it. It doesn't separate you from humanity. It binds you closer, but without illusion. It doesn't teach you to escape. It teaches you to see, and to love what you see exactly as it is. You start to recognize the perfection inside the imperfection, the grace inside the grief. The things you once resented become the very proof of your transformation. The storms that once drowned you are now the rivers that carry you home. You see that every false thing you lost made space for something real to bloom in its place. And this time, there's no excitement, no drama, no need to tell the world, just quiet gratitude. The silence that once frightened you now feels alive, as if truth itself is breathing beside you. You no longer chase meaning, you live it. You no longer seek love, you radiate it. You no longer try to hold on, you let life hold you. Awakening wasn't late. It arrived at the only moment it could. The moment you stopped trying to control its timing. Every ending carried you. Every silence taught you how to listen. Every shadow guided you toward the light. And now, standing in that stillness, you finally understand. You lose everything unreal before you gain everything true.